This was the 2016 presidential electoral map, according to the polls on September 19th, 2020. As you can see, Donald Trump had leads in Nevada, Florida, North Carolina, Ohio, and Iowa, whereas Clinton led in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. So which states did the polls get wrong, just overall? Well, 4 of them, actually. Nevada, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. They also got a lot of margins wrong. New Mexico was likely, not lean. Utah was safe, not likely. Same with Alaska. Same with Missouri. Same with South Carolina. Georgia, they also were wrong on. So, the polls actually showed a very tight race. As you can see in the Electoral College, this would have been one of the closest results ever. The third closest, actually, behind only the election of 1876 and the election of 2000. Because Clinton would have won the Rust Belt, but lost Nevada, creating a debacle. So, that would not have been good. But what did the polls this time around say? The polls suggest a Biden landslide, and we generally like to ignore this because, well, the polls were wrong, and I say this in quotes, wrong in 2016. They got 4 states wrong. And if they get those same 4 states wrong again, giving Trump all these states, Trump will still lose. But people don't like to to remember this because most Democrats believe in the polls, whereas most Trump supporters do not believe in them. But I think the polls tell a good story. They take a snapshot of the electorate. So it's important to remember a few things. 1, not all polls are created equal. If I have a poll and I'm trying to poll the state of Pennsylvania and I sample 50 people who I see on the street, many of them won't end up voting, and I'll probably end up with a skewed result like Trump plus 20 or Biden plus 20. However, if I work for the New York Times and poll 1,000 voters who are 100% registered to vote in Pennsylvania, I'll get a more accurate result, maybe Biden plus 5. So you have to remember that. And RCB does a good job of weighting the polls. If you pull up general election polling at a nationwide level, you'll see that polls get weighted a certain way. For example, Rasmussen Reports was not a great poll in 2016, and they put Trump ahead by 1. So that doesn't mean that nationally Trump is ahead by 1, but RCB takes it into consideration when they make this graph. The graph suggests that Biden is ahead by 6.5 according to the polls as of today. But really, this is not a good sign for Trump at all. I mean, sure, the polls might have been a little off in 2016, but in 2016, Trump was actually, surprisingly, at one point, on September 19th, he was behind by only 1.3. Now he's behind by 6.5. Clinton won the popular vote margin by around 2%, and all Biden has to do is outperform her by 1% to flip the Rust Belt, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. It would also possibly flip Florida, depending on who votes and who doesn't vote. So, yeah. Instead of Biden and Clinton being at the same national polling number, Biden is outperforming her by 5.5%. That's not a good sign for Trump at all. And if Biden does outperform Clinton by exactly 1%, he would win a narrow victory. But if he's outperforming her by 5.5%, he'd be winning in Arizona, which he is. He'd be winning in Pennsylvania, the Rust Belt, obviously. He'd be winning in Nebraska's 2nd District. He'd be winning in North Carolina, winning in Florida, and, believe it or not, winning in Georgia. So, yeah. It's not exactly a great way to look at it, though, from a national standpoint. We have to look at state-by-state polls. So we're going to start with Wisconsin. Hopefully that'll show up. Wisconsin, Trump versus Clinton polling. Actually, we're going to start with Nevada because that's first on our map. So Nevada, currently, Joe Biden has a 6% lead there. And at this point in time, on September 19th, give me a second for the graph to load. Yeah, on September 19th, Trump had a 0.5% lead, so roughly the same lead that he had to Election Day. So this tells us that, for the most part, the polls in Nevada will remain fairly stable until the election, and that this lead that Biden has will probably stay the same. in the polls in Nevada underestimated Clinton by nearly 3%, and they're putting Biden ahead by 6. That's not a good sign for Trump, as Trump believes he can win Nevada, and I think he can too if he focuses on it, which I don't think he will, because it's unlikely that he does win there without. So, Nevada, according to the polls, is likely Democratic, but at this point in time, 4 years ago, it was tilting towards Trump. The same goes for Arizona. Arizona is a competitive state, and if I pull up the Arizona polling between Trump and Biden, I will see that Biden has a 5% lead. This is pretty big for a state that went to Trump in 2016. The polls in Arizona at this point in time had Clinton behind, actually, but, it's still interesting to look and see how much he was behind by. So I need to wait for this graph to load. Hopefully it'll load sooner rather than later. So, yeah. So, on September 19th, Trump had a lead of 1.6. So, now he's losing by 5.5. So, that's not a good sign at all for him, or 5% actually. And yeah, he was leading at this point by 1.6, and he ended up winning it by 3.5. But even if he outperforms the polls at this time by the same amount, he would still lose Arizona. So according to the polls, Arizona is again better for Biden than it was for Clinton at this point in time, as you can see. And if we look at our Rust Belt map, which is where the polls apparently most Trump supporters say that polls don't know how to pull the Rust Belt because they were off in 2016. That's fair. They were off. And at this point in time, they had Clinton ahead in Wisconsin by around 3. They now have Biden ahead by double that, 6. So even if you give Trump the 4% boost that he had in the state, he was behind the polls by 3, he won it by 1. So even if you give Trump that 4% boost, he will still lose Wisconsin, he will still lose Michigan, still lose Pennsylvania. The one state, I meant Minnesota instead of Pennsylvania. We're going to talk about Pennsylvania right now. The one state where Biden's lead is smaller than Clinton's in the Rust Belt is the state of Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania, Clinton was leading there by 6.6%, and Biden is now leading by around 4%. That's not a good sign, because at this point in time, Clinton was leading by 6.6, and she ended up losing it by 1. And if you weight the polls according to that, Pennsylvania would go to Trump narrowly. But weirdly enough, the polls in Ohio are a lot better for Biden than they are for Clinton. Clinton was losing in Ohio for most of the time towards the election, but Biden has been holding a relatively stable lead in the state, even though I do believe it will go to Trump by 2 points. So that's an interesting thing to look at. Same with North Carolina and Florida. They were really considered competitive, but Trump had the polling advantage consistently in both these states. But now that's shifted over to Biden. The same goes for, a state like Texas, although it's still in the red column. The state had been looked at as solid red for the whole cycle of the 2016 election. It was called at poll closing for Trump, and most people didn't think much of it. This time around, Biden is pouring money into Texas, and most Democrats believe they have a very good chance at winning there, even if they may not be the favorite. So what does this say about 2016 polling versus 2020 polling? Well, sure, Clinton might have won it if the polls were accurate, but if the polls are accurate this time, it'll be a complete landslide for Joe Biden. So, don't say the polls are wrong. Try to tell me why you think Trump will win by not just saying fake news or the polls are wrong. And if you're a Democrat, don't entirely rely on the polls. Polls only tell a snapshot of the story, a tiny bit. They capture a small audience. And maybe they're accurate. I think they will be close to the actual results. But it's important that you look at other stats like betting odds, midterm election results, primary turnout. That is what also tells the story. So guys, thanks for watching this video. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see you all in the next one.